Welcome back to another episode of the Writer's Review, where today I'm going to be taking a look at Red Seas Under Red Skies, written by Scott Lynch. Now, Red Seas Under Red Skies is the direct sequel to The Lies of Locke Lamora, which I already covered on this channel, and is the second installment in the Gentleman Bastard series. The series thus far is comprised of 3 published titles, and the 4th one is on its way, which has a lot of us fans very excited. Although information about the release date of this 4th installment is still very vague. The wiki says that it's gonna be released sometime this September, and Goodreads states that it's gonna get released in October of next year, but there's been no official word from the author himself, so I guess we're just gonna have to wait with our fingers crossed and hope for the best. Story-wise, the novel picks up right where The Lies of Locke Lamora left off, with the Gentleman Bastards fleeing Camor after their fight with the Great King. They settle in Talvarar and soon enough return to their larcenous habits as they set their eyes on robbing the richest person in town. From there, the novel follows the same general plot pattern established in the previous book, with the protagonists dreaming up new ways to outsmart their target, other parties interfering with their plan, and of course several close shaves with death. Apart from that, the novel takes the series into a completely new direction as well, with the protagonists spending quite a lot of their time at sea, and this encompasses everything from their training from novice landlubbers to experienced seamen of the criminal variety. In terms of subgenre, the novel is mostly based on a foundation of drama, which mostly consists of the infighting and friction between Jean and Locke, as well as the typical social chess associated with the confidence scheme aspect of the Gentleman Bastards books. In second place is action, which takes a step up in terms of prevalence compared to The Lies of Locke Lamora, and surprisingly, these segments mostly focus on Locke himself, despite Jean being the muscle of the pair. This isn't a bad thing though, since Locke has plenty of opportunity to grow in this regard, as you all know. As far as other, more supportive subgenres, you'll find quite a bit of comedy of a similar scope to the previous book in the novel, as well as a very lovely and heartfelt romance subplot, which in my mind rivals that of the Frontline series, and even that of the All Souls trilogy, and mind you, that last one is a full-on fantasy romance series. There's also quite a prominent historical element to the book, with a third of the novel dedicated to sailing on the high seas, so a lot of these segments feature an in-depth look at the ins and outs of crewing a sailing boat, and I think that most of these segments are quite accurate, although if they are just gibberish, they're very convincing gibberish. The novel also touches on a few philosophical topics, such as the superstitions tied to life at sea, as well as a bit of Locke's grapplings with the burdens of leadership. You'll also find quite a bit of suspense scattered throughout the length of the novel, as well as a suspense/horror sequence somewhere at the center of the book. And again, as with the last novel, the fantasy elements and world building are again very closely tied together, although for the sake of this book they mostly serve as decoration, although I'm sure they're also there to set up whatever fantastical plot Scott Lynch has in store for later on in the series. But apart from a few sprinklings of sorcery here and there, this novel is again more of a fictional history novel, set in a world with a few fantastical elements. In terms of other quirks, the novel again features a ton of well-worded and very poetic swearing, just like in The Lies of Locke Lamora. Also, at the start of the novel, there's a segment where Locke is all depressed after his encounter with the Grey King, and personally I found that segment to be a bit hard to get into, since it really didn't feel like the Locke I knew from the previous book, but once that gets over with, the novel picks up speed really fast and becomes even more complex in scope than The Lies of Locke Lamora was. Also, the novel finishes on a cliffhanger, so you better have book 3 on hand when you finish. Lastly, Red Seas Under Red Skies is a total emotional roller coaster, ranging from joyous triumph to total misery, so you better have some tissues on hand for when those pesky ninjas start cutting onions behind your back. So in conclusion, Red Seas Under Red Skies takes what was good about the Lies of Locke Lamora and adds a couple more things, so I would definitely suggest you go and pick it up, especially if you're a fan of thieving or pirate stories. I guess you could technically read it as a standalone book since it doesn't tie too heavily into the previous book, if you discount the character development, of course. But if you are planning on picking up the novel, I'd still suggest you first pick up The Lies of Locke Lamora, since it'll make this reading experience much more pleasant. In fact, I really think this series is underrated, looking at the number of reviews left on Amazon and Goodreads, and I'll have those ratings on screen for you now. If you are considering picking up the novel, you have a choice of ebook, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook versions. In terms of length, the novel comes in at 220,000 words, or 25 hours for the audiobook version. Price-wise, the Kindle version is the cheapest as usual, coming in at about $7.50, closely followed by the mass paperback version, and then both the hardcover and standard paperback version. Sadly, there's no Whispersync deal available for us audiobook listeners, so you're gonna have to pay out $15 straight or use an Audible credit to pick up the novel, which isn't such a bad deal since the novel is basically thrice as long as a standard length novel. As usual, prices might have changed since the time I recorded this video, so I'll have an Amazon link in the description below, and also if you go and purchase the book through that link, it also helps to support the channel. And that brings us to the end of the spoiler-free section of this review. If you liked the video thus far, consider sharing it with your friends and liking it here on YouTube. And with that out of the way, let's get right into the lesson section. Here, I'd like to focus on the novel's prologue for two main reasons. The first is the literary role that it plays in the structure of Red Seas Under Red Skies, and second is how the author managed to give this segment two distinct feelings between the two times that it appears in the novel. So first off, we have to ask ourselves, why would anyone add a prologue to their novel in the first place? If you're in the fantasy genre as well, your first thought might be that you'll fill it to the brim with the lore of your fictional world. I mean, you spent months developing civilizations, languages, and even centuries of history. Where else are you gonna include all that lore which will actually enable your reader to appreciate the full breadth of your story? But, as you probably already know, that isn't such a good idea, because prologues like that usually get skipped altogether or make the reader drop the book entirely. So what are prologues good for then, you might ask? Well, as I finished this book's prologue, the first thing that came to mind was something that Brandon Sanderson said about prologues in one of his lectures, and his reasoning went something like this. Prologues are basically a promise from the writer to the reader as to what they can expect and look forward to later on in the book or series. Now, this can be in terms of the direction of the plot, some fantastical elements that might pop up and are not present at the start of the book, and so on. Essentially, in your prologue, you're sitting down your reader and directly telling him, look, by the third quarter of the book, you're gonna see dragons, wizards, aliens, or an apocalypse, or whatever other fantastical thing you have planned for them that's gonna blow their brains. But for right now, we're gonna be stuck doing some groundwork. You're gonna meet some characters who are gonna be doing some boring and seemingly random things, but I promise you that as the story develops, you're gonna see those things that you originally picked up the book for. But until then, just bear with me for a moment. When you think about it, that's exactly what Scott Lynch does at the start of Red Seas Under Red Skies. Now, to summarize the prologue, he first describes that there's a ship burning in the bay, that there's a crowd gathered to watch this amazing spectacle, all the while oblivious to Locke and Jean, who are trapped in a deadly standoff on the pier with two assassins, followed by an unexpected twist where Jean also turns on Locke. If we go one by one, we'll see that all of these things in a way foretell what kind of things we can expect from the book at large. For instance, the burning ship could symbolize the political mayhem the gentlemen bastards will cause between the Archon and the Priori. The ignorant crowd could indicate that the gentlemen bastards will operate under the masses and their targets' noses, oftentimes in plain view, and at the same time will be operating alone with no friends or associates to fall back on. The four-way standoff, as well as Jean's betrayal, could hint at the numerous parties involved in their future schemes, from the Priori, the Archon, Requin, and the Pirates, as well as the constant hostilities between all these parties. In some sense, you could also argue that Jean's betrayal is a foreshadowing of the conclusion of the novel itself, where Locke betrays Jean and spikes his drink with the cure to their poison, but I think that's a bit of a stretch. I think it's far more likely that this was added as a red herring to keep us worried all the way through the novel that the Bond's Magi will take control of Jean and make him betray Locke. The second thing that really impressed me about this prologue is that this sequence of events pops up twice in the novel, first at the very start of the book, and then again somewhere in the last third. Now, what struck me most about this is that despite being the same, almost word by word, these two segments read very differently and have a very different feel, or at least they did to me. For instance, in the prologue, the sequence has a very palpable feeling of tension. For one, you have these two mysterious assassins who have actually gained an upper hand over the gentleman bastards and are demanding that they surrender their weapons and go with them to an unknown location, which in some sense gives you the feeling that these two assassins must have masters in high places and are not to be messed with. Not to mention that there's a ship burning in the background, which you automatically assume has something to do with Locke and Jean, either that they're the ones who caused the fire, which would explain the angry men with crossbows, or that that was their getaway ticket, which someone intercepted. Not to mention that as the situation develops, and you as the reader become a bit more comfortable and hopeful that Jean and Locke will find a way out of this mess, it turns out that Jean actually turns on Locke, which is totally unexpected and again reminds you that the Magi of Carthage actually have the power to take over Jean, which gets you really worried as to how Locke will get out of this mess on his own. On the second go-around, however, you already have so much more contextual information that it gives the segment a totally different feeling. First off, you already know that the ship on fire in the bay is part of a festival and has nothing to do with the scheme that Locke and Jean are involved with, and also, since it's so late in the book, all of the major players in the scheme have already been established, and the mysterious assassins are made more to feel like a nuisance to their scheme than an actual threat. Plus, you find out that the only reason why the gentleman bastards get jumped is that they're in a hurry and are not paying as much attention. Also, Jean's betrayal feels a lot less convincing because, for one, it's already established that the Magi of Carthage have no intention of taking control of him, because they would have before if that was their intention, and since the gentleman bastards have been at sea for so long, there is no conceivable way that he could have been involved with anyone else in the city. And of course, all of this gets confirmed as the scene plays out to its conclusion, instead of ending off on a cliffhanger like it does in the prologue. So that's why I think this segment is so amazing, because Scott Lynch effectively managed to use the same collection of words to create two very distinct storylines, just by playing with the context and the expectations of the reader. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you found it informative and entertaining. I'd also like to thank the 3 people who have subscribed in this past week. It's a pleasure to have you on board. If you haven't subscribed already, consider doing so. And well, have a pleasant week everyone, and I hope to see you on the next video.